gonads, which are the reproductive organs, testes or ovaries, or chromosomes, or chromosomes, can be a combination, that aren't typical for male or female. So what does that mean they're not typical for male or female, right? I'll give a few examples that make it a lot easier to understand. There are some women that until recently, until the last century, would never have known they were intersex, for example, because they look typically female, their bodies are typically female, and by that I mean, you know, everything typical. Breasts of average or large size, vaginal openings, everything typically female. However, as these women got older, they would not menstruate, right? They don't menstruate, right? And so in the past, okay, I don't menstruate, don't know why, chromosome tests weren't available, and you know, that they didn't even exist until I believe it's the 50s when they were introduced. So, you know, people didn't know. All they knew was that these women were you know, did not menstruate and would not be able to have babies, right? Later, as chromosome tests were developed, it was discovered that intersex women with this variation, and I like to say variation because, as I'll get into, like, the biggest issue that intersex people have faced is that we've been very medicalized as a community. You know, the thing that we talk about that goes on in circumcision and how it's become this totally popular medicalized view, that happens to us as an entire population group, as a whole group of people. Our very existence is medicalized. So it was discovered that women with this variation called CAIS, which is complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, although many people like to drop the syndrome and just say I have androgen insensitivity, right, to be more humanizing, have XY chromosomes. So XX chromosomes are typically female, right? They're the chromosome patterns that most, you know, large majority of women have. However, intersex women with CAIS have XY chromosomes, right? And so, for example, in 1968, the International Olympic Committee began doing mandatory gender verification tests, right? This happened because there actually was a case during the 1932 Olympics, which was the year that Hitler was in power, and they were in Berlin, where a Jewish runner was taken out of competition and replaced with a male runner because they felt that it would offend Hitler to have a Jewish competitor representing Germany, right? So literally, they had a male, and there's a good documentary about it called Berlin 26, where the other competitors were very, you know, a lot older now, talk about, yes, you know, she was very private. She never went to the locker room with the rest of us, and, you know, she always seemed to be shaving, and so yeah, so there was actually, it's because she was actually a man, you know, who had been put in at the last minute. And the assumption was that also that, of course, he would bring home a gold medal. But interestingly, he didn't. He came in fourth. So that's interesting too, right? But because of this, you know, it didn't emerge right away. Right? It took a lot of years to verify this. And so finally, by the 60s, the Olympics put mandatory gender verification into place, hoping to find any potential males masquerading as women. But what happened was they never found one case of this. In fact, what they discovered was intersex women with CIIS, because they would do a body search, right? All athletes had to go before doctors and just strip down. Yeah, and it was humiliating, and it was, you know, yeah, a lot of them complained, and finally they decided, okay, that's too humiliating for the athletes. We'll just do an easy swab of the inside of the mouth to test for chromosomes, because that's how you test it, right? So it's not violating in that way. Just do a swab, test the chromosomes, and then, lo and behold, they discovered intersex women, right? The thing is, these women are now, fortunately, the practice was stopped in 1999 of the mandatory test, and women with CIS are allowed to compete because it was discovered that, in fact, although they have large levels of testosterone. The testosterone in their body isn't functional. And that's why it's called insensitivity. The body is insensitive to it, and it's as if it can't read, it can't process that it's there. So women with CIS actually have no functional testosterone, which regular non-intersex women, all of them, do, right? Which is why they have no body hair, including pubic hair, right? Because testosterone, the other androgens, which are male hormones, produce body hair. So women with CIS have no body hair at all, typically translucent skin, do tend to be tall, and in fact there are many, many rumors, so many that we really believe it's true, that supermodels, many supermodels have CIS, right? Because it's like the really beautiful skin and tall and strong features. So anyway, this is a good example of one intersex variation. And I think it's the most, in some ways the most significant to think about, because it really shows you how the categories of male and female that we assume to be all that there is just don't work in the way that we think they do. You know, why would you label a baby? You know, even today when chromosome tests are available, babies are not all subjected to chromosome tests. In fact, none of them are, right? What do? When baby's born, we look at it, and doctors label it male or female. So, of course, women with CIS are labeled female because that's how they look. And typically what we found is that they grow up to be heterosexual and gender normative. You know, they're not particularly, you know, atypical in any way, actually. But they have XY chromosomes, and not just that, they have internal testes, right? So the very definition of female in the dictionary are women with ova. Humans who can produce ova, the eggs which allow you to get pregnant. And that is the definition of female. For male, it's, you know, human beings who have testes and can produce sperm, right? That's the definition of male. But wait a minute, now we have these women who have testes and XY chromosomes. You know, some of the definitions now will throw in chromosomes as well. But historically, it's about reproductive capacity, right? Whether you get pregnant or whether you can impregnate. So this is what intersex is. However, the intersex people that are most vulnerable to what even the UN recently called a human rights violation, which I'll get into, are people like me. I don't have CIS. And I am actually not sure exactly which variation I have, and I'll explain that in a minute. But I was born with what is known as ambiguous genitalia. Right, it is what it sounds like. It's genitals that are kind of in between. So this is obvious at birth. CIS is not obvious at birth, right? It's obvious at birth. It's the classic form of intersex that in the past was called hermaphroditism. Right, which is a word a lot more people are familiar with, hermaphrodite. And the reason people know it is because it comes from culture, not medicine. Right? There's a myth, the ancient Greek myth of Hermaphroditus, and Hermaphroditus became, you know, someone. He was a very beautiful boy apparently, and a nymph fell in love with him and begged the gods to be united with him forever. And the gods played kind of a little humorous trick, as they often do in mythology, and fuse them together. So Hermaphroditus then was said to be exactly half female, half male, both. Well, this is actually not possible in humans, right? And this is why it's not our preferred label. Because hermaphrodites, and there are some hermaphrodites in the animal kingdom, who literally either can both impregnate or be impregnated. In other words, they have both full sets of reproductive organs, or have both sets at different times in their lives. Right? So at one point they'll actually have like female reproductive organs, and then they change and have male reproductive organs, and it tends to happen actually related to what's necessary at the time. Like if a lot of the males in the species die out, you know, some of them might convert into females. Really fascinating, right? But not possible in humans. So, you know, what we've seen is that sometimes in the press and other places, people will use this word and be like, they were a hermaphrodite with both sets of sex organs. And that's actually not true, and it also adds to the stigma, you know, this kind of sensationalized view of us that leads to what we call intersex genital mutilation. And this is where my work and the work of intactivists and people that believe in intactivism rather than circumcision ties together. And so what happens to the vast, vast majority of intersex babies born anywhere in the modern world today, including right here at UCSF in San Francisco and around, you know, everywhere in the US, is we are operated on at birth to make our bodies conform to male and female standards, right? And this happens in cases like mine, when the genitals are, you know, are different, are kind of in between, are not typical for what, you know, they should be, right? So there's this idea of what genitals should look like, right? Which is what really drives this abuse. And the reason I call it abuse is that although the intentions, you know, presumably are good, right? And in many cases they are. It has been shown by various medical studies and by hundreds of adults who underwent the procedures to be extremely harmful. We're not talking in this case just the pain of the actual procedure, but we're talking about a lifetime of sexual function, of the loss of sexual function, right? Because when you remove an entire clitoris or penis, you know, I'll say depending on which way the child would have grown up to perceive it, obviously there's an incredible loss of sensation. So I'm going to get back into that, but I first want to kind of talk about, you know, why does this happen in the similarities, right, between our work and circumcision and basically children's right to physical integrity, you know, and how we believe that children all have the right to physical integrity. So, you know, I think that everyone agrees, you know, one thing throughout the world that we all agree is that most parents want what's best for their children, right? So that's what guides all these things, and there's so many examples of all the sacrifices that parents make, right? Mothers quit smoking or drinking if they did it, you know, people take on second jobs, sometimes even immigrate to a different country to get what's best for their children. It's a normal impulse. However, you know, these impulses are always guided by what's popular and considered, you know, the status quo of the culture at the time. You know, and so what happens when cultural values don't necessarily support or promote what is actually best for the child, right? My first example is, in the years 961, this is going back a long time, to 975, China was ruled by a man named Li Yu. Okay, and Li Yu fell in love with a dancer. And this dancer happened to perform what she called a lotus dance. And she bound her feet in order to I don't know, give her, you know, the research I've looked at has said she had a noon appearance, you know, with these small feet to do this lotus dance. Well, because Li Yu was the ruler of China, a very wealthy and respected man, this practice became popular amongst the wealthy in China, right? So basically it became the rage for anyone in the upper classes for women in the upper classes to bind their feet, right? This went on for 10 centuries, okay? Chinese foot binding was not outlawed until 1912, right? So not 10, yeah, almost 10 centuries, right? Am I doing my math? So 1912, not that long ago when you think about it. And just a little over a month ago in September, there was actually an interview with a woman, 102 years old, who was born the year before Chinese foot binding was outlawed. She was born in 1911. She's still alive today. And she remembers her mother using a cloth to bind her feet. Because for women, what ended up happening is that all women in the upper classes in China had their feet bound. But about 50% of all women, of all classes in China were subjected to this because it was believed to be the only way they could marry into money, right? Which in those days, that was women's role, right? Marry well and, in that way have success for your baby. So all women were encouraged to do it, especially women in the countryside. It was a way to kind of lift their social status. So her mother bound her feet, and she said it took her 6 months to be able to walk normally and get over the pain. And, and she's had to live that way till today. So, while this seems today obviously barbaric, right? And people talk about it, and it's like looked at as this example of like, wow, how stupid and barbaric and ill-informed people were. And yet, think about it. From the 900s till 1912, it was actually considered a positive thing for the child. So humans have a tendency to get ideas, culturally driven ideas of what is best for us that really may not be beneficial. Coming closer in time, 1 year ago, in September of 2012, it was reported that a baby in New York City had died due to a ceremony, an Orthodox Jewish ceremony, and I'm sure that I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, but it's Metzisa Bepeh, okay, Metzizah B''Peh. So this is a ritual beyond even the traditional circumcision ritual, where after the circumcision is performed, the rabbi sucks the blood off the penis. Right. And, it's practiced right in New York City. In fact, the vice president of the Agudath Israel of America Association reports that 2/3 of all babies in the Hasidic Jewish community in New York City today undergo this ceremony. 2/3. However, the reason the baby died is because 90% of humans today, this is the reported figure, have what's known as herpes 1, right? So herpes 1 is not considered a venereal disease, but it's a virus, and it's the one that affects the mouth and throat. And this virus is deadly to infants. They haven't built up the immune system to fight it. So this baby died, and so far there are 2 deaths reported from this practice, and 11 babies that have contracted herpes from this practice. And it's very dangerous. And yet it still goes on. They were trying to regulate, and however, the vice president of the association said that, if regulations are enacted, they'll probably just go underground with the practice. So, this kind of shows you a similar situation where, cultural beliefs, what is best for the child are driving illness and even death, right? So it's beyond even what we saw, it's actually risking death and illness just to, do what people think is right culturally. So the thing about circumcision is that obviously not all babies that are circumcised not all babies that are circumcised are Jewish, right? And so why do people who aren't Jewish subject their children to this practice? What we have found, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with, it's the argument that this is the right look, right? My penis looks this way. I've heard mothers say, well, I don't like uncircumcised penises. I like the look of a circumcised penis. It tends to boil down to the fact that this look has become popular, right? It's just an aesthetic judgment about what's the right look for a penis, which interestingly, I tend to, I'm spiritual in my own way. I was raised Catholic, and that's not what I practice anymore, but, I do believe there's a universal intelligence, and I think it did a fantastic job with creating humans just as we are. I mean, medicine still can't duplicate, a lot of the cures available, like right through herbs, right? My sister cured herself of an immune disease called sarcoidosis, which through the use of herbs, right? And today in New York, they recommend, she was told it's an immune deficiency disease, and you get these lumps on your body, and that's one of the first obvious symptoms, and it also gives you fatigue and tires you. She went to a physician who told her, you'll never get rid of these, and in fact, they're going to end up covering your whole body, and you'll get cancer, and at one point you will probably die from this disease. Fortunately, she decided to seek a second opinion in alternate care, and she found this incredible doctor who actually uses herbs, and she cured herself entirely. Her lumps didn't increase, but they decreased, and she went to the next meeting. There's meetings for people who have this disease, and most of them are obese because they prescribe steroids to treat it, right? And it makes people obese, and then it makes them need air tanks. So the people at these meetings are rolling around their air tanks to help them breathe, and they're obese, and they're doing what the doctors have recommended. And so she, there was time to share, any updates, and she shared, and the physician became very angry with her for sharing, but she went on and she said the doctor's name several times who'd helped her and gave the phone number, and it's just a really good, I share this, it's obviously a little off topic, but I share it to show that, there are incredible resources that are available that are not what you'll hear from Western medicine, even though obviously, I do believe Western medicine is great for some things, right? Mainly emergency situations, right?
Totally.
If it's an emergency, great, please cut me open, take whatever out, do what you need to do. But, for preventative care and even, curing diseases, it's not what we need. And certainly we don't need it when there is no issue, right? So intersex people, like healthy boys, don't have health issues the majority of the time, right? I actually have always had great health. Knock on wood, wherever it is. Thank you. And and I'm grateful for it. But, which is one of the reasons I've never even bothered to be tested for, to find my intersex variation and what has made me this way. It hasn't been an issue. So the reason I wasn't operated on is a very fortunate fluke. I was born in '68 in New York, and the procedures were completely common at this time. But my father was not from the United States and is significantly older, and when he went to medical school in Colombia, South America, these surgeries didn't exist yet. And so doctors were not exposed to this way of thinking, right? They weren't taught that this is the best thing to do for an intersex baby with ambiguous genitals. And so he had a healthy daughter and decided, like any doctor knows, you don't operate on a healthy kid if you don't have to, right? Unless you support circumcision, right? Or unless you support the idea that a baby with a different body, i.e. an intersex body, needs help to be better, right? So this is what guides intersex genital mutilation. And in February, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture condemned the practice, which was a huge victory for our community. They've actually called on all nations, member states of the UN, to ban it. However, no nation has, because similarly to circumcision, there's several beliefs. One, that a parent should be able to make these decisions over what to do with their baby's bodies. Right? This is what legally enables both circumcision and intersex genital mutilation to take place. And then two, there's an inherent, deep belief that many people have, that, and especially doctors, that intersex bodies are innately inferior and that people would benefit from having them, quote, corrected, end quote. And this view is so common that the surgeries were originally known as normalizing surgeries. So I know it's really funny, right? Like, okay, normalize that baby. Let's perform normalizing surgery. And the name really says it all, right? And we use that as a way to describe them all because it shows the deep prejudice, which informs these surgeries. And another, example of the prejudice, because you might, if you start to learn more about this topic, and you might start to have questions like, wow, but what does a parent do, right? I mean, it's definitely a surprise to most parents today, especially because the protocol when the surgeries were introduced in the late 50s was hide the fact that your baby was intersex. Hide it even to the parents. Doctors were taught, run tests, stall. You don't want to tell the parents that they have an intersex, or in those days they used the term hermaphrodite. You don't want to tell any parent that they have a hermaphrodite as a baby, right? They won't be able to handle it. Society doesn't have a place for it. And that part is true. Society has not had a place for it yet. We're getting there. But so we have to present a male or female label to the parent. And in fact, a very good friend of mine who's like about my age, which is not young anymore, but she's 47, but it wasn't that long ago that she was in medical school. She said that in fact that's what she was taught. It's the standard thing that, you have to present a male or female label. You may not have to operate. That part is finally being questioned due to the activism that myself and other groups have been doing. People are recommending perhaps holding off on the surgery. Even some doctors are looking at this view. But still, you have to present a male or female label, right? To this day, that's still that, To this day, every day an intersex baby is having their right to sexual freedom and sexual enjoyment taken away.
And the doctors won't tell the parents?
Now they're telling them, but what they do still say, they're telling them, so what's happened because of the push and the activism and all the attention that, we've fortunately been able to draw to it, they know, and there's a lawsuit now, too, where they're finally suing because doctors, and this was recently, the baby he's 10 now, so when he was an infant, the doctors, as they typically do, did not tell the foster parents at the time. The baby had been, given up for adoption. It was with foster parents. It was technically a ward of the state of South Carolina. So they didn't tell the social worker from the state of Carolina that officially were the guardians for this baby, or the foster parents, of any of the harms, right? And there are already medical studies. There are already hundreds of complaints for adults. They didn't share anything about the fact that these surgeries have been shown to be harmful. And they also did not even discuss that not performing the surgery was an option, which is typical many times with circumcision as well, right? Because of this, the adoptive parents, who are wonderful parents who actually love their child, as they are, and support their child at being as they are suing the state of South Carolina and the doctors, and they're able to do it. Our problem, the problem that we've had is that, our parents are not intersex, right? So unlike other communities, I've had to deal with different issues, and people, one way that's been described is horizontal discrimination and vertical discrimination. Vertical discrimination is racism, where the parents of the child share the same identity and can thus help their child with the type of discrimination they face, right? With gays and lesbians, intersex people, and I'm probably forgetting some other, but those major groups, the discrimination is horizontal, right? Your parents may likely not have this. So they not only don't understand it from firsthand experience, but they may actually even have the same prejudice against you. Right? And a lot of gays and lesbians are familiar with this, including myself. So although my father spared me from surgery, He's very homophobic and actually, disowned me, and I had to drop out of college when my brother outed me as a lesbian. So, what I know is that if he had been taught these procedures, which are grounded in homophobia, he probably would have had it done, And that goes to show, again, the cultural drive, Like, it's kind of like if parents were never taught that circumcision was a good thing, if that cultural idea just didn't exist, it wouldn't be happening, right? And someone mentioned, you mentioned that your parents just weren't familiar, but they followed their gut, so they didn't listen to different cultural information. So I had the same thing, and, my father followed his gut, and it was a blessing for me. And, what's made me speak out about this is that after a, blissful, happy childhood of thinking I was just a regular girl, I didn't know I was intersex, they didn't talk to me about it. Catholic home, 12 years of Catholic school, no nudity, no talk of sex or genitals, just not popular within Latino culture. So I didn't know how different I was, and I didn't feel, I liked sports more than other girls, but I never wanted to be a boy. I didn't have problems wearing girls' clothes, and I was really into makeup when I was in high school. But, so it was totally typical, childhood, because I wasn't given, like, these messages that there was something wrong with me, right? And then flash forward to college, there's finally a community, a lesbian community, so I was able to come out, and that's when I realized how different my body was, right? Before that, I had been sexual with men, and actually the first one proposed to me, and I share this because the myth, one of the myths that drives these surgeries is, if you have a girl with a large clitoris, like, what man will want her? She'll be too masculine. She might end up being a lesbian, and, she might, but she might not. I get tons of emails from women fortunate enough, well, not tons, but, bunch, fortunate enough to have escaped this surgery as well. And they're like, I didn't even know I was intersex till I saw you speak on this. I've done a lot of media stuff. I saw you speak on Oprah on 2020 or whatever. And she's like, I'm married. My favorite one is one who said, and she was somewhere in the Midwest, she said, I'm married, and we have 3 children, another one on the way, and, my husband and I really have a great sex life, and he really enjoys my clitoris, but after, seeing this show, I think that I'm intersex, and I don't know, should I get a surgery? And of course, by the next, right? I'm like, wait a minute. And obviously when, I email with her, but, the point is that clearly it was not an issue, right? And so when I was 26, I finally learned that intersex was the word to describe my difference. I was aware of my difference, as I said, once I started sleeping with women and had more women to compare my to. I was like, whoa, wait a minute, I'm very different, But there was no internet. I couldn't Google it. I guess I was lazy, or it wasn't really a big deal, so I didn't walk over to the library and look it up, because I actually liked my body. So, and I didn't have a problem with this, and I didn't have health issues. So there's no reason to do anything, but I finally saw a free, it was on the cover of the SF Weekly, actually, which you all know. It said both, neither, either. And I looked it up, and I was like, oh my God, I think this is what I am. And I can vividly remember I was on the 22 bus, in the mission. I was like, it was an amazing moment for me, because I had grown kind of confused, and there's no information, no role models, and I was like, okay, this is what I am, and I was into it. But surgeries were the whole focus of the article, and it left me a little confused, because I was like, but if I am this, why didn't I have this surgery? Maybe I'm not different enough. Maybe the difference has to be a lot bigger. So I, literally and figuratively. But I contacted the group that was there, and it was funny, I actually measured my clitoris and was like, tell me, am I intersex? And they're like, yes, you are. And so I went to a conference that was fortunately taking place. I was fortunate to be here in California when I learned this, and there was a conference, up, in Marin somewhere, and I met other intersex people for the first time in my life.
And I thought I was going to be sharing and finally able to connect about what it was like to, have this difference and, and frankly have some great conversations about it. And instead, I spent most of the weekend fighting back tears, hearing these stories. So I'll just share one that gives you an idea about the damage. There were many different workshops we did, just amongst ourselves. There were 11 of us, and out of the 11, actually 11 not with me, so 12. One other had not had the surgeries, which is actually, I realized later, a high statistic because she's one of maybe like 4 I've come across, besides emails, but in person, who haven't had it, right? So I was lucky, actually, statistically, that she was even there. But everyone else had horrible stories. And it's molestation, child abuse, but continued. Because what happens when you operate on a baby is that the body keeps growing, right? So many of these surgeries need to be done over and over again. I know one guy who had 16 surgeries by the time he was like 9 years old. He spent every summer like at the doctors and in clinics. Yeah, horrifying. And his case was a difference that is actually so minute. It's something called Hypospadias, where the urethra isn't in the center of the tip of the penis, right? But this is different. Oh my goodness, God forbid we send out a baby boy with a slightly different penis, right? So instead, they operate to get it in the center. Well, his body's growing where he once originally had a steady, regular stream of urine. He now sprays. They had to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it because it's like it's opening and it's horrifying. I had another woman talking about how, we did a workshop on sex, basically, in our sexual experiences, and I didn't even share because I felt like, how can I possibly rub it in these people's faces? I can't. It's like not only, it's complete opposite of what they've experienced. One woman literally demonstrated how if she sits down and she positions herself, fortunately she's flexible, so that she can take the heel of her foot and bang her vaginal area with her foot. After about 10 minutes, she begins to feel something, a tingling, and she wondered if it was similar to what women feel during sexual arousal. And it's like just sharing it. Almost every time I share it, I get teary because I'm like, anyone who's experienced sexual arousal knows how far away it is from having to bang yourself for 10 minutes with your foot to get just a tingling. So many doctors will still say, most, in fact, sadly, that, these surgeries don't harm. We've improved the surgeries. We really try to avoid nerve endings. Well, you can't avoid nerve endings on a phallus, right? The penis, clitoris, the gender-neutral word is phallus, and you can't avoid injuring the nerve endings when you do this. And the surgery is it's so complicated to reduce the phallus inside. You're not talking now about just removing the foreskin. You're actually like cutting off a big chunk of it to make it smaller. So it's a horribly injuring procedure. And, what drives it is this idea that despite all these injuries, the child, will be happier because the babysitter won't react. The babysitter won't, have to change the diapers and be horrified by these different genitals. The child won't be mocked in the locker room. Everything else. Later, they'll have a normal sex life, the opposite of what we've actually found to be true, because they'll have normal genitals, right? I want to move on so we don't get too depressed with it. But, there's another thing that's very similar, which I want to say is, here we have these 2 procedures, which we've seen are really harmful, circumcision and intersex genital mutilation. There's another common procedure, which very differently has actually been banned. It was banned in 1997, quite some time ago, and that's female genital mutilation, right? Many people have written about why female genital mutilation, right, as opposed to male genital mutilation and intersex genital mutilation, has been banned. And the reason that everyone agrees on, actually, is that, it's because it's an African cultural practice. So here we have, like, racism. I mean, for the weird twist of stuff, right? So, one way that racism ever, potentially did something good is because of the because of the way that that there's a lot of racism. Let's just face it, against African cultures. I mean, I'm not gonna soften that up. Like, when the studies emerged around how this surgery, which is the same one done to intersex girls like me, right? It's the same thing. And in fact, it's in many cases less so. It might just be a nicking or something, not a whole reduction, but it has also been a whole reduction of the clitoris, right? And it's for same cultural reasons, marriageability, right? Men will like her more, blah, 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 all this stuff, right? Basically, I mean, it's a cultural, but it's the same one we have here for white and all, ethnicities of intersex babies, right? So let's not forget, it's like the same thing. But somehow when it's done by people of African cultures or African descent, it is, quote, barbaric, end quote. I mean, not just harmful, right? Not just incredibly harmful, not just medically unnecessary, but the words, barbaric, which have never been thrown, by people in the power fields that have control over these procedures. Do not use words like barbaric to describe circumcision or intersex genital mutilation. They use words like our right to religious freedom, and our rights as parents. But in African cultures, it was very easy to deem it barbaric and to lobby and to have it banned in 1997. So, it's very similar. Interestingly, though, however, just yesterday in England, there's a woman named Layla Hussein, who is the founder of the Daughters of Eve, a group that lobbies against female genital mutilation. She actually went to a shopping facility with a petition that said it was to protect her culture, traditions, and rights, and it was in support of female genital mutilation. Okay? Within an hour, she was able to get 19 signatures for this petition. And only one person, after, I guess, I don't know, there weren't many people there, as we know, right? A lot of people avoid anyone with a petition. So I guess that's what happened. But of the 20 people that she spoke to in an hour, only one did not sign. And she said, now she did this as a cultural experiment, right? To kind of see, how do humans respond and what is driving these procedures. And she said she literally told people, to try to get signatures. She would say, "It's just genital mutilation." and people would actually say, "Oh, yeah, that's true. It's just genital mutilation," and somehow sign this petition. So, it's fascinating and surprising, but but I think, it also, because she was talking about, you will help me support my culture and my tradition and my rights, right? Now people are trying to go another way, and be cool. Well, okay, let's help this woman, support her culture. Yes, we like to support diverse cultures, and are signing. And it really, I think all of these situations just show how culture, beliefs, such as religious beliefs and cultural beliefs, are often driven by very strange motivations that we later find out were, as society progresses, we see are ridiculous. And I do want to share, and I think, is it close to time? Close to time. Okay, cool. I see him looking over. One good, very positive victory for all of us is that just over a month ago, on October 1st, the Council of Europe, which is it's kind of like a little mini UN of Europe. They're not lawmakers per se, they're not making the law, but they're very respected by the nations of Europe that are, members of it, and they make recommendations, policy recommendations for law, right, that are listened to and quoted and often used by countries in drafting their laws. They do it around human rights specifically. So they passed a resolution called the Children's Right to Physical Integrity. Yay! I know, it's a huge victory. And one of the things I love about it, and why it really is a huge victory, is it is for all children, right? So the causes that were specifically addressed, and I'm proud to say that my organization was one of them that worked to draft this resolution, OII Europe. So we're OII Global, I'm the chair, and then OII Europe worked to draft it, and it includes female genital mutilation, circumcision, and intersex genital mutilation, and even ritualistic like piercings and tattooing, which adults have come to say, they would have preferred, to have the decision over whether to be branded this way. And it's interesting because we're talking about, if a religion tattooed a cross on your forehead, would you want that? So it's kind of the similar thing that actually happens in certain cultures is the ritualistic tattooing. That was even included as well, right? So they basically recommended that all nation states ban these practices, because all children deserve the right, to decide for themselves if they wish to make irreversible changes to their body, right? And I think that's really what it boils down to. Culture, as we see, changes over time, always changes and always progresses. So to use those values is wrong, and in fact, that is the argument for banning female genital mutilation, is that it's a cultural practice and we can't endanger innocent children irreversibly, in particular, just like circumcision, just like intersex mutilation. We can't make these irreversible changes on children based on a cultural belief. And so they actually have acknowledged this, and it's in effect, it's going out to all member states, and we're very happy about that. And with that, I'll close. Thank you, everyone.
Give big thanks to you and everything that you just shared, and I want to open up the floor for some questions and answer time. We got about 10 minutes for that, so if we can bear that in mind as we move forward.
And by the way, I know it's a it's for me it's personal, but I speak about it all the time. So no question is too personal that we have specifically about intersex issues. Sure.
So what percentage of the population, like how different is not normal, or
1.7%.
Okay, so about
As common as having red hair.
right, okay. So then the follow-up question is, then how many people actually know that they are intersex?
It's a really good question. We don't have a stat. I'm going to just can you pass it around? Thank you. If you know anyone who may be expecting or just, maybe interested in children's rights, please feel free to pass this on to them. It's also available free online. The link is there. It really varies, and it varies from region to region.
Mm-hmm.
Places where Western medicine is not available, people with CIAS, the variation I first spoke about, may go their whole lives and never know. Yesterday I was interviewed with someone else who didn't find out till they were about 30. One of my friends is an intersex man, and he has XXY chromosomes. It's a chromosomal variation. He found out when he was 60. He's been a firefighter. He's been, all these things typically considered male, but he's also a poet, and he's always written about feeling both, and actually uses, neutral pronouns and refers to himself as we. Actually, he doesn't use the pronouns, which is why I say he refers to himself as we to represent his female and male halves.
So not till 60, so it really kind of depends. And like I said, I myself didn't even find out, so I was almost 27 when I found out.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends. Unfortunately, the people who do get taken in for these surgeries, they find out real quick, right? So it,
And then just a follow-up to that, so when in the hospitals, the baby has maybe whatever, so is it usually cut it off and make it a girl?
Yes, that's a great question. So in Western nations, where sexism isn't that strong, and I'll explain why, the medical literature, I did my undergrad thesis on this at Berkeley and literally read all these articles where doctors are saying, well, it's easier to dig a hole, meaning create a vagina, than build a pole, meaning try to enlarge a small penis, so they make a uterus. This is hideous because not only are you removing the sexual sensation, but you have literally every intersex man I've come across who had this done, like always felt like he was a boy, despite being pumped with estrogen, having huge breasts, okay? So intersex boys are typically given a full sex change surgery as babies, just because people think, well, with a large penis, he'll never be happy, but with a woman, even if she, can't feel a thing, and literally the articles say, like, well, for a woman, what is required is a vaginal opening large enough to accommodate an adult-sized penis. Wow. And if she has that, she'll be able to marry, and she'll be able to be happy.
I just finished reading Middlesex. It talks a lot about that experience.
There's a better book, I'll say, Golden Boy just came out. For anyone who's interested, it's in that pamphlet. I say, the thing about Middlesex that we don't like, I actually met the author and he apologized to me personally. And fortunately, Oprah did pick that book, and then she wanted to educate about the topic, so I was able to be on Oprah. It was fabulous. She was fabulous. But he apologized to me because he, it's a fictional book. It won the Pulitzer, and I'm happy that it brought attention to the issue. It was great. But he made the character be intersex because his grandparents had been brother and sister. Oh. So it's like, great, we're already so stigmatized, and you're going to say falsely, because this has never been talked about even by medicine to be a cause of intersex variations, right? That it's this incest thing, right? But it did bring it to public attention, so it's great.
I just looked at that aspect as just a chromosomal variation. It might just be more prominent in one family versus another.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great.
So,
well, you're a little more educated.
Well, I'm
I
a
think you're
nurse.
smarter
Oh.
than that. We were worried. We're like, great, is this going to make people even more?
No, that's my other question, is that with the advent of more people having amniocentesis and CVS, when they're pregnant, especially older women, are they finding more of these cases with the X? Because I just took care of a woman who had a baby, it was XXY,
Right.
From the chromosome studies and the amniocentesis.
Well, I actually haven't heard that it's become more common because of that, but what I have heard related to that is that selective abortion practices have been on the rise.
I'm not surprised at that at all.
I'm not either, but it's very horrifying. So not only, can we be hurt at birth, but now some people are actually choosing to just terminate, and it's a real, what it is because intersex, we throw off this whole idea of like, well, there's only male and there's female and there's opposite, and the men are the hunters and the breadwinners and the women are the baby makers, and that's how it is, and we want to maintain that, and there's centuries of sexism driving that.
Oh, very much so.
Right? And so it's like, we put a hole in that whole system. It's like, wait a minute, no, we're not so opposite. I joke that penises are chia pets, clitoris chia pets, because every baby starts female in the womb, right? And if it has an XY chromosome, the clitoris literally grows into a penis. I didn't know this until I started researching it, right? It should be taught, but it's like we're not. So it's one phallic organ, right? So if the body can read the testosterone that gets released, the clitoris grows into a penis. In cases like mine, it started to grow larger and then stopped, right? So it's like this spectrum of development and of like sex, biological sex, right? But sorry, go ahead.
Oh, if you have something more to say, I'm
No,
just
no,
trying to let you know I'm waiting. I actually have two questions. One is, most of your talk you were referring to women, you know, intersex women, and then when you refer to men, so how, and if you can't really tell that, like, a lot of people would think an extra large clitoris really is a boy, so why would they even question and do anything other than the fact that the penis is way too small in their eyes?
Because the penis is way too small in
Right.
our eyes. Do you know what I mean? It's this cultural thing, it's this decision like,
So then
well,
an intersex male had a sex change operation that they tried to make him a female and he really
that's the
wasn't
typical,
gonna have the
yes, and so
manifestation.
to elaborate a little more, and thank you for pointing that out, you know, with the short time period, I'm trying to cover the connections between the issues and I maybe didn't explain as clearly. So yeah, first of all, the reason I say intersex girl or intersex boy or intersex man, intersex woman is because that's how most of us tend to identify. I identify as both, and I sometimes use the word herm, but I'm a little bit atypical for that in the community. And part of the reason why that's the way most of us identify is that's actually the way most of the bodies that most of us have. You know, it's really not, as I was kind of saying, there are very few cases where it's like really hard to have any idea, you know, any way to judge this baby as male or female, right? So for an intersex boy, yeah, there's a penis with a urethra, just like a standard penis, and that's really the difference, right? Like, so I call my phallus a clitoris because I don't urinate out of it.
Okay.
And that's sort of the differentiation, right? Did you grow, you know, a urinary tract? Does sperm come out of it? Does urine come out of it? Yes, okay, that's a penis. Does it not? It's a clitoris, you know? And then within that, the size is, and that's, mind you, just in science, right? Because then, as we know from the trans community, people can grow up to feel and label them different things themselves. But within like a scientific description, that would be the difference. So intersex boy, if I say that, I mean a man, you know, an intersex boy, intersex male are the scientific, who has testes and a penis, but the penis is deemed too small. It's ambiguous. That's not a standard. And mind you, the difference in babies is so small.
Right.
There's this
Right.
there's an excellent visual point.
Most baby penises are just big anyway, right?
And one group had this great thing called the phallometer, where it showed, and it's a business card thing, where it shows in centimeters, right? Like from here to here, pink, you have a girl. From here, you know, and then jumping that much space,
Right.
literally, like 2 centimeters are blank. And then from there to there, oh, blue, it's a boy. And then in that little in-between space of 2 centimeters are where like babies like me are born. And they call it ambiguous genitalia. And, you know, and then people feel like you have to operate. So what we recommend, and it's in the pamphlet, is you don't have to operate. Pick the sex that seems more obvious based on the medical information, you know, because most, you know, just like most non-intersex people, most people with penises grow up to feel like men. Most people with clitorises and vaginas grow up to feel like women, right? Not all, but most. So label your baby what is closest, you know, based on the reproductive organs, based on the, you know, what you see. And then if they change, be open to the fact, though, that if, as they get older, they don't feel like the sex that you were labeled, that you can change it at that time, you know? But again, not necessarily with surgery at all.
Let me speak to this really briefly. A few years ago, and I think it's available still on YouTube, Discovery Channel, back when it was actually Discovery Channel and not this weird thing that it is today, did this wonderful documentary on intersexuality, and that's actually what I've learned a great deal about it.
Right.
And this was like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was this beautiful thing, and they had like a young couple in Chicago, and then they had this family in Latin America. And the young family in Chicago were struggling, and the doctors were pressuring them, and they were trying to decide what sex the baby would be, and there was all this angst and misery, this poor young family, very young couple with their little baby. And then in Latin America, they interviewed this mama, And they have the subtitles, you know, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but it's just so cute. And the mama was saying, yeah, Jorge, when he was little, he was a girl. And now he's not. And it was just like nothing. And so she pulls out her album of little Jorge when Jorge was a little girl. And all these pictures of Jorge in beautiful frilly dresses, little Latina, perfect, beautiful little baby girl. But then as the baby grew, there was a shift, and the family just went with that like nothing. And I was just sitting there going, I was admiring of it, and like how that could not even happen here.
It's interesting, right?
It
Because
just
we look
could
at
not
other
happen.
cultures as being more behind, but the U.S. is actually more behind.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of, right? A lot of these issues.
Well, actually, I wanted to ask you a question about that, because I think it's, the Indian, they celebrate both, like, people who are both. Right, so, do you see that in other cultures, where there is a recognition and sort of, a glorification?
Well, so here's the thing. In India, there are hijras. They tend to be, some of them are intersex, but the larger degree are actually what would here be considered trans women, you know, people with a male biological sex, but who enjoy expressing themselves as women. However, what is bad about the situation is that they are not really in a positive situation. Although they're acknowledged, they tend to be outcasts. And I've met some hijras, you know, we're like Facebook friends and whatever, and they're having a lobby for their rights as well, because, I mean, so the good thing is they're more known, right, and there is a community, but a lot of them are beggars, a lot of them are sex workers, you know, they're not exactly given a positive place. However, in Native American culture, sadly, the decimation, right? Only the culture I believe in so much. Right. They actually, you know, value intersex people. Like, they're the one culture that we have really found where there's like evidence not just of acknowledging our existence, but literally valuing our existence. You know, and in many, you know, obviously there's many different tribal cultures, Native American is not just one, but in many of them, we actually were respected as shamans and spiritual teachers. Like, that was the role. And so, you know, and the view is, there's one beautiful quote I remember reading that, you know, anyone who can climb to the top of the mountain and look down both sides, meaning the masculine and the feminine, the male and female experience, you know, has a lot to offer, you know, and a way to offer healing to our culture, right? Because of the sometimes misunderstandings between men and women. So, you know,
someone who can walk between the worlds.
that's exactly what Oprah said.
Right.
It's so funny. But she asked me, she's like, so wait, so you actually walk between both worlds? This is so fascinating, right? And it's, yeah, it's gonna.
I wanted to, I'm actually work for the state of California, and this is very interesting for me because I do research, I'm a research scientist, and I do genetic screening, which speaks to what you were just talking about. They actually screen every baby. So what percentage of people who become intersex or are intersex or
Yeah, I would say R.
have CAH?
CAH is the highest, it's the most common variation.
Okay.
This is one that's in people with XX, typically female chromosomes, but ambiguous genitalia, large clitoris is usually,
So
and I believe the percentage for CAH is 1%.
So the intersex people have, 1% of the intersex people have CAH, or the opposite?
Oh, within the whole thing? No, like 1% of humans have CAH.
Okay.
Statistically within intersex, I'd have to look it up, and we can, you know.
Yeah, I've
easy
always
know, we
been
can
really
exchange.
curious about that
But
because I
it's the
test for this
highest
every day.
within all the variations.
Okay.
So, but I just don't have the number.
And only once have I call in my positive results to the endocrinologist, and she called me back and she says, we just wanted to give you the information that this baby has been gender reassigned. But I don't know if they really did an operation. I
Oh,
think
right,
they
maybe
just
they
said,
just changed
yeah, on
the
the
marker,
TRF,
right,
you know, that said the baby's
yeah, the
demographic
legal
data. Now the
status.
child was now a boy when they had.
Well, that's true, it probably is, because otherwise they probably just would have said we changed your sex
Oh, I
assignment.
think this was within days. They might have done it later.
Oh, they do it. They do it right away. 'Cause
Jonathan.
I've seen babies born with ambiguous genitalia, and they do the chromosome studies first, and then they send them to Children's Hospital or UCSF, and they have the surgery within the first week or so.
So do you know what percentage have
I have no
CAA?
idea.
You know what, can we, I can get back to you on that, but I wanna have Jonathan.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I know that you said the majority of intersex newborns are not in need of any sort of genital surgery. Could you maybe speak to some of the intersex variations that might warrant a surgery in kind of an emergency scenario so that we can be familiar with situations that
Right, so
might
you
warrant-
know, yeah, because
Right.
sometimes people will say, well, they need medical care, and so it's good for people to be informed. Okay, there are two situations where this happens. One is CAH. There's different types of CAH. Sometimes they're described in different ways, but they typically are described by lay people and even doctors as either having salt wasting, what's called salt wasting, where the body dehydrates. Basically, the baby lacks cortisol, and in the past, it used to just die quickly, right? And now you can test for it, and immediately cortisol, you know, they begin to give cortisol. So this is actually a medical emergency. But not all babies with CAH have it, which is important to note, because it often gets pushed like, well, CAH, they all need, you know, they could die, da-da-da. It's not true. Okay, and then two, and this hits different variations, where there could be a urinary tract incompletion. So the urinary tract isn't formed completely, and so the baby can't urinate, which obviously is a big problem, and it can, you know, be fatal. And so there need to be operations just to make the urinary tract functional. But again, these are rare, and it's not what we refer to. That's why we call it normalizing surgery, because that's a medical, need. And what I like to say when people try to paint it as a disease, this disease, this condition, this disorder, is, just like males or females, every male or female has some health risks associated with it, right? Every female might develop breast cancer or ovarian cancer, but do we cut off the breasts? To avoid it? Do we have to?
Because we have this
Right, well, yeah, that's starting, right, but like on a baby, babies don't have any yet, but do we cut out the ovaries? One day you might have ovarian cancer, so let's get rid of that and so, so there are health risks associated with being male or being female, but we don't say it's a disease or disorder to be male or female. So intersex people are the same way. Sometimes, in rare cases, there are health risks we might have. But being intersex in and of itself is not a health risk, right? It's just a different type of person that people have been scared of. Honestly, that's all it is. Yeah, it's about fear, like fear of this in-between hermaphrodite status, and it's one of the reasons I'm really out and that more people are coming out, because we have to kind of put it out there, We're kind of like where gays and lesbians were back in the 50s, where people would say like, well, I don't know, there's some type, but that's not really a type of, And in some countries they still say that, right? That's a Western thing. There are no gays in Saudi Arabia, That's a common, right? In many countries they will literally say that it doesn't exist,
We're gonna need to stop here.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for all your great questions. You're welcome.
So, I would like to invite my beautiful committee to come. You. Where's Andrea? Then our photographer needs to take a pretty picture of us. Maybe Alon can hold the iPad for you for a minute.
Sure.
You want to be surrounded by
Doing
beautiful committee.
Video, do you want photo?
Oh, it's already on.
Okay, we'll just do video, not photo.
Right, I'm doing a photo.
Okay.
And before we move on to our beautiful panel, which is going to happen in a second. This wants to have a moment. I'm gonna find what I was looking at a moment ago. Got away from this. Looking got away from it to keep going.
That's a little jingly. That's a
Is there
little
a jingle?
jingly.
That's
Cute.
So, I would like to introduce Zandrea Sanford, and I would like to introduce Ann Witzel, and myself, Samsara Morgan, and we are the Bay Area Birth Justice Committee. And our junior members.
Yeah.
And just at this moment, as we were sitting and having this time together, I want to really appreciate these ladies and the hard work. I mean, they're actively mothering. I'm actively grandmothering and all the other things that I do. And it takes a lot to do what we did, so I just want to honor and respect the time that we put into this. And the babies that played at our feet as we did it. And a lot of what this is about just expanding how we view our children, moving away from this patriarchal attitude around parenting, and looking at, how, in what ways, and do people own each other? I struggle with it. Even during the conversations that we're having today, I've been struggling with this. I have 5 sons, and I am very, that's my child. And yeah, and no. And it's really important for us as we evolve further as a species, and the whole push around attachment parenting is honoring the child's cycle, honoring who that person is, separate from the parent. And some people have even had a hard time understanding that this beautiful little person has its own journey on the planet that we facilitate. We keep them out of traffic, we feed them good healthy food, we love them up so that they can have their own walk on the planet. And it's important for us to be reminded of that as we do this work. And actually they are giving us a gift by allowing us to let us raise them. Actually they help make us interesting and intelligent human beings. Because I'd be real stupid if I didn't have all those boys to raise. Really, so much that I have been really literally forced to learn in the world is because I wanted to be a good mother to my sons. So along those lines, I would like to share some words from Khalil Gibran on this subject, because it was really burning in my heart as we were talking. And I want to use it as a prayer, and especially here we are, Dios de los Muertos, and I want to offer this prayer specifically for our little boys that are lost through circumcision, or children who were lost through these horrible, unnecessary surgeries. And I offer it as an enlightenment for us in the room, although we're kind of the choir preaching to each other. But I want to offer it to the whole world. And I'm a big believer that prayers and good intention, they travel like radio waves. So as I offer this, let's all just vibrate out the love so it just goes to where it's needed. Maybe helping some parents to make decisions that honor their kids today. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backwards, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children are living arrows sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, For even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves the bow that is stable. We'll have a 5-minute break, thank you, and then we'll have our panel. Let's make it.
Good start.
Yes.